Hey everybody, welcome back to Maros, and strap in for what is probably going to be the most slow-paced episode in the history of gaming, since even though this video is sped up 12 times, I didn't really manage to get that much work done, or at least I got a lot of work done, just on a large scale. It's not that much. Basically what I did is the station, a very basic idea of what's going to be around it, and a start of the transfer track, but 99% is just going to be the station. And I expect it to be done with this in a couple of hours, primarily because that's sort of what I was planning to do, because otherwise I would run into time issues, which I'm doing now anyway. But it just turned out to be a pretty time-consuming endeavor. Reason being, I would say, is for one, something that just always kind of happens for me, and this might be relatable for quite a lot of people as well, is that I just kind of start something and feel like I can finish this in an hour, and I'll just leave it the way that I've been planning to. But while you're building, you just find all of these different things that you want to add or you want to do, and everything just ends up taking so much more time, and suddenly it's 5 PM and you've wasted an entire day playing Planet Coaster, and it's awful. And anyway, that's beside the point. Basically, this thing took a lot of time, and it took an especial amount of time compared to what I'm usually doing, since as you can see I am absolutely going crazy with making custom everything in this case, since basically I feel for this kind of theme, and I'm going for a traditional-esque Russian theme. It's a little bit more romanticized than that, but with this kind of theme, the theme is really in the detail. Take out the details of this and it's basically just any wooden alpine thing. Could be somewhere in Europe, could be somewhere in North America. I feel it's really in the details, in the wood carvings, in the shapes of the roofs, things like that, where the Russian wooden style sticks out. And that's why this ended up taking a huge amount of time, since basically everything about this station is made custom, and even unfinished, it's a couple thousand pieces. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's a pretty good reason why a lot of this episode is just detailing, not so much making large scale pieces or landscaping, anything like that. Now the first thing that I was very inspired to do was the spire of the building. Well, first and foremost, it's the most important thing for me in the building itself. It's not really what gives it the mass. It's the biggest part of the building is just going to be the roof over the station, but this is really the signature iconic part of the building, so I wanted to make sure that I got this right away. And it's just a simple spire. It's somewhat similar to the spires that we have in game, but I wanted to get a slightly sort of custom, a little bit more steep idea to it, and also wanted to make some custom dormers-ish parts sticking out here. And something that I wanted to try and do, and especially like in many of the cases of the roofs that I'm building here, is add wood carvings underneath them, which I'm not exactly getting to. I'm just still working on the ironworks and the little decorations on top of the roof, which are equally as important, I would say, but it's definitely the the wood carvings and like the woodworks which I ended up sinking a lot of time in. Now this was just using all of the different Christmas, well, whatever decorations really, to put down different roof items, things like that. I'll definitely be using some of the Christmas decorations as actual Christmas decorations, but for the most part, they're just amazing building pieces that I wanted to experiment with a lot in this build. Which, a lot of it comes back in these little roof decorations. They're the smallest things, but these are some of my favorite things to really be building. It's just so much fun to experiment with them, and they just add that little bit of flair to any building. I often kind of overuse them too. I also wanted to place a bit of snow on the roof, because even though I wanted to keep the amount of snow quite low, kind of make it seem as though, you know, the snow has fallen a couple of days ago. There's still a bit on the trees, and there's still a bit on the roofs, but it's not like everything is 100% covered. So it's just sort of lying in heaps on the bottoms of the roofs, where it just kind of normally accumulates, and that also just sort of leaves the rest of the roof still open for you to actually see the detail. And I hope that's kind of a nice sort of in-between option between having too much snow and just sort of covering all of the details, or not having any snow at all and having it stick out with the otherwise pretty snowy environment. So here's where I got into some of the first woodworks underneath the roof. It's just fairly simple though at this point. I don't feel it's very representative of what all of the wood like work was going to be put into. But it's a bunch of different things. Firstly, I wanted to use the wooden pillars to actually get some solid base for these decorations, and then I'm using many of the different gingerbread pieces, which I'm never using for gingerbread, but they're absolutely amazing for any kind of patterns that you want to use and put onto any kind of surface or texture. Especially if you change the color, they blend into all kinds of things that you could use them for. So in this case, I wanted to use them for the cornices and decorations underneath the roof here, but also on the side of this wall over here, and it's just sort of a mock wall to see what this would look like. But this is basically the top spire, almost finished. And I was going to raise it up a little bit, like getting the composition of a tower like this right. Just took a little bit of trial and error, but at some point I just gave up and decided to work on the rest of the station. So the first thing that I wanted to head into is the walkway, which takes you from the exit back onto the paths of the park itself. And I guess there's a sort of a double function in the sense that, you know, it's obviously the exit walkway, but I didn't want to just leave that out there in the building somewhere and just kind of hide it. So it's this nice way to add something that comes to the front from the station and gives it a bit more of a facade feel, which you'll see in a bit. So that's why I also wanted to focus a bit on adding all of these decorated fences on the side of the exit path. Then I made the actual big roof, and this is pretty much making a custom scenery set at this point. Making a couple of different custom roofs into a set which is modular and which you can use to put them into each other and make your own custom roofs without spending too much time placing every single object. So that's basically what I did at this point, very rough sketch of what the roof is going to look like eventually. And after this I wanted to make the gable pieces with some of the gable carvings, so I went back into some of these very light wooden textured pieces to make the carvings on the side here. I wanted to use the very light wooden colors, by the way, to sort of give the idea that this is a very newly built building and the wood is all just still fresh and new. It's just built in a very old sort of romanticism style. So that's why the wood for a lot of this building is just very light. I also figured it just goes very well with the very dark red color of the roof. So yeah, I'm actually quite happy with how this looks. Speaking of colors, by the way, I totally forgot to mention, but you can probably see that I changed the colors of the coaster. I changed it more than once, actually changed it between the time-lapse and the POV of the last video as well. For now I changed it into green and purple, which is a little bit less interesting. I do love the color scheme as it was, I just feel this fits much better with the theme of the winter that we have over here. I just wanted to avoid the color light blue and white for all I could, because that would just completely be gone in the landscape, and it's a pretty overused color for winter themed coasters. So instead I feel green and dark purple is a pretty good way to sort of hint at the general cold spectrum of colors, but at the same time not having it become too cliche. And interestingly, I feel this color scheme works super well as a tropical color scheme as well. But the same goes for the color scheme that I had earlier on. I might try that again as well. And also the color scheme is something that I am kind of a perfectionist about. I like to change them like all the time, so these might change at some point in the future again to maybe replace the green with a slightly darker color, but we'll see. Anyway, I wanted to get back to the station here. Because the roof didn't have anything to support it yet, so I wanted to make some simple trusses to actually hold up the roof. So these were simple trusses to begin with, just a couple of lanterns and the basic structure that you need to, realistically, probably, I don't have an engineering degree, this is generally how you can build trusses, to hold up the roof, basically. And I guess that's all alright, but it's nothing that's like very decorative. So after finishing these couple of girders that I built over here, I actually wanted to revisit the trusses and add a bit of decoration to it, because now it just kind of sticks out as a very simple part of an otherwise very detailed building that's pretty much sugar-coated at this point. Also something that worked out quite well was actually changing the direction of the roofs here to make some slightly angled roofs, make the building a bit more asymmetrical and a bit more interesting that way, I felt. And that turned out to be not too hard. I was actually very afraid of this not working out, but it connects perfectly, and that should pretty much finish that. So here I went into the decorations for underneath the trusses, which are very similar to the motifs that I already have at the top of the roofs. Having repetition throughout a building is of course super important, so I wanted to make sure that these patterns kind of do reference like the patterns which I have in the rest of the building, but at the same time are used to decorate the trusses and make them a bit more interesting than just bare planks and just something that holds up the structure of the roof. Because just because something is like necessary for structural purposes doesn't mean that it can't be part of the scenery as well. So I wanted to first get into some supports and make something interesting out of that. Not just simple wooden pillars, but actually decorate them a little bit. And I believe that Christmas decoration is a pine cone. Yeah, that's what you call them. Which fits the theme perfectly and is something which also fits the shape of the pillar in quite a nice way. It kind of gives it a crown, so that's something that I wanted to do here. And then the pattern for the top beam is just quite simple compared to the patterns that I already have. Slightly different, but I feel like there's enough repetition in there to at least keep it all like it's all part of the same building. And then I went into the front of the facade here, kind of give the building a front because it didn't really have anything that just speaks to the people as you're walking here, and this is really the most important angle for the building. This is where you're gonna, you know, be walking into this side of the park if this were a part of a different park, but in any case, as you approach the coaster, this is the angle that you're gonna look at the station from, so I definitely wanted to give the station some weenie capabilities from this area. So it just sort of opens up toward this part. And I'm not going to do as much with the back. I definitely want to get back to it. No pun intended. Because, you know, I don't want to just leave it behind. But this was the most important part. So the back is interesting because I actually went back to the Russian style of roof that I hadn't tried yet because I was very afraid of it. And at this point, I was already so far into the time-lapse without, you know, even having finished the building, then I figured, you know, fuck it. We're just gonna try it anyway. To make some of these very typical Russian bell-shaped roofs. I'm not actually sure what the exact name for them is, but these are just modeled more or less after the standard kind of roof that you very often find. It's something that I didn't have in the building yet, and that just kind of felt bad, and kind of felt like something to make it look a bit more Russian, and this will also be a pretty handy modular piece. So I'll be saving all of these things and hopefully reusing them for the next buildings, meaning the hut or the transfer track or whatever else I'm gonna add. I didn't speak about the hut yet, but I'm not gonna do that yet. So I'm gonna reuse these pieces and hopefully the future episodes should be going a little bit more smoothly and a little bit more quick. Because I basically had to make everything from scratch in this episode, and that's really what most of the time was being sunken into, which makes it quite tough because I did put myself on a deadline. To come back to a couple of comments that I got on the last video, this series does mean that I'm sort of pushing my other series out of the way because this takes a tremendous amount of time. And I put myself on the deadline of Christmas Eve. I want to get the POV out before Christmas Eve. The current plan is to have 4 episodes of this, which means that there's a time constraint, but there is also sort of an episode constraint. I have to get enough work done in every episode to actually deliver the end products by the time that Christmas Eve has arrived and get a POV video out for it. Which is pretty time consuming. There are quite a few hours that I need to sink into the time-lapse and the editing, cinematic shots and all that, so we'll see how I manage, but basically the only reason that I still have trust that I can make this is because this was just sort of planned to be my most time-consuming episode ever anyway, because I need to make everything from scratch, and the next ones will just take the already built modular pieces, maybe change them a little bit, but more or less just use them as if they were in-game pieces. And one of the reasons why I want to do something like this is just kind of like what I said at the beginning of the video. This is just such a unique theme that I didn't want to try it with the in-game pieces and just sort of make it like it sort of approaches the theme but isn't entirely it. I just wanted to go exactly for what I was looking for, which is why I'm making everything custom. And also it just kind of helps make everything look unique. I think especially after thousands of players play the game more and more and you see the same pieces over and over again, you're just gonna recognize them and nothing's gonna stand out if you use the same pieces. And really in using pieces in different ways that they're not supposed to or that nobody else has done yet, that's how I think you can make some actually amazing, creative, unique rides. Not to say that rides that don't do it aren't good, that's definitely not the case. It's just, it's a way to make something that has a much more lasting impact, I feel, something that's more timeless, because it's more close to what your actual fantasy of what you're building is, than being constricted by what the game actually offers. So at this point, I have just about kind of finished the gable for the building, started work on the transfer track, and a little bit of scenery around the coaster as well. It's nothing too interesting yet, but that does give a pretty good base for the rest of the videos. So I hope you guys enjoyed this time-lapse. In the next one I'll be working on a little hut somewhere, finishing the transfer track and general scenery around this area, and hopefully setting it all up so that in episode 4 I can finish the entire project. So see you guys later.